Locho sampo pa gyo trashi pa tuche tempe trile yarngo da helge drolor zampe te parche palden lame shabla solva Omo a Guru Vajra Dara Suma Timo Nisha Sane Karm Uta Varda Nishri Bara Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om a Guru Vajra Dara Suma Timo Nisha Sane Karm Uta Varda Nishri Bara Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om Guru Vajradhar Suma Timu Nisha Sane Karm Uta Varda Nishri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om Guru Vajradhar Suma Timu Nisha Sane Karm Uta Varda Nishri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Dāgi Chitsun Lama Tuje Che Nyamda Dala Tuje Siksu Su Gebe Shesan Dala Tendo Su Oyon Sunge Nawa Tsedo Su Tseche Ningne Sawa Debe Tse Techen Korlo Visu Lekshu Ne Yila Sambe Deden Malyopa Geme Lhunge Drupra Jinge Lo Tsonyi Sodan Dikdun Shabe Tse Dunge Namge Yinsu Lekshu Ne Lapchen Tsonyi Yonsu Tsobat Heranye dun chanra jinge lo chancho parge nitsen tugun tu Nyo peme siudro lekshu ne chancho drube gegen kunshish Dungen de la drubra jinge lo dage lo na chola choba da Peme samchor ngenba shiwa dan chodan timbe dudun malyopa Peme lhunge drubra jinge lo dorna tingne tsera tamche Techi pardo nega tamche tu rese kyamne lama kele Tukche chingi dala sikso so gongyab drewe nyamda dacha Chetun lame tuje rab gongne kudan songe nawa drame Nyamso nyongwe kesan topra sho kewa kundu yanda lama Rame cheki pela longcho chin sadan lamge yunde rab zon Dorche changi koba nyur toba sho Hakyuke kudandaki lo hakyuke sundandaki hakyuke daki tenyerme chikto jingelo hakyuke kudan dagilo hakyuke sundandagi Hakyuke tudan hagi yerme chiktu chingilo makyuke kudan hagilo makyuke sundandagi makyuke tudan dagi yerme chiktu chingilo Om Muni Maha Shakyamuni Swaha. Om Muni Muni Mahamuni Shakyamuni Swaha. Om Muni Muni Mahamuni Shakyamuni Swaha. Since yesterday, I was wondering a little bit how to start, what to say today actually, how to start. And I was thinking, okay, let's start by the part which, because Buddhism is so vast, it's so deep, so it's quite difficult to say, okay, which part to choose, because there's so much to say. There's so many aspects that could be an introduction to Buddhism. There are so many parts from which we can talk. It's not like, okay, only one way. So I was thinking, okay, let's start from what it's more important for me, or what touches me deeper. Very often, people ask and may say, okay, is it Buddhism a philosophy of life, or is it a religion? Okay. Sincerely, for me, it doesn't make much difference. In the sense that I'm not looking for a religion. For me, what is important is to be happy, to do something that makes me a better person, that makes me happy. If it is a religion, if it is a philosophy of life, it doesn't make that much difference. These are just names that we give, labels that we add. But what does it mean, a religion, first of all? Normally, religion, we have two types of religion, mostly. We have monotheistic religions and polytheistic religions. If we see religion from this perspective, Buddhism is not a religion, because Buddhism is not talking about God, nor the existence or the non-existence of God. Actually, Buddha, even in his teachings, at one point, I remember that Buddha lived around more than 2,500 years ago in India, and the main religions of the time were the different forms of Hinduism and Jainism and so on. And there are many gods in Hindu, so on. So you have Brahma, Vishnu, and so on, so on. So Shiva and so on. So what happened is that one of the things that Buddha said was that at no moment Buddha said God doesn't exist, or the many gods don't exist. What Buddha said was, look, the only one that can make you truly happy is yourself, not any other god. There can be all this Brahman, Vishnu, okay, wonderful, all of them, but who can actually make you to stop suffering, and who can actually make you happy is only yourself, no one else. What does it mean? So if Buddhism is a religion or not, there is many aspects of Buddhism that are very similar to religious aspects. True. It's not just a sort of mental game type of thing, conceptual process. There are many other aspects which are, let's call, religious aspects. So I would say, yes, Buddhism is a religion. But it's not at all something related with the concept of God. Quite different. So, what do we mean when we say a philosophy of life? When we say a philosophy of life in Buddhism, we call it drupta. And this is one of the main points, which is drupta rangilong or tebra drupena drupta. Drupta means to have one point of view about something and to be sure about it. So to follow it fully. To have no doubts, really to stick to it. So which means, like, actually all of us have a philosophy of life. We all have our own paradigm. We all have our own view of existence of the world, our own world view, how things exist, what is right, what is wrong. We all have our own views, which are the results of the culture in which we were grown, which is the result also of the education we receive, the situations we experience, and so on. Okay? All our thoughts and all of this. So, actually, when we talk about having one view of reality, having our own paradigm, having our own philosophy of life, the way how we see reality, it's something in a way quite complex because it's the result of many things put together, because it's not conceptual. We're not talking about philosophy, having a philosophy of life as something conceptual. Okay, so I follow the Buddhist philosophy, so I believe there is a Four Noble Truth, and then there are four seals, and this and that. Oh yes, karma and reincarnation, and so on. If it is only conceptual, that's not a philosophy of life. It becomes truly a philosophy of life in the moment that I truly apply it in my daily life. It's part of the way how I see and experience reality. Okay? And one of the very important points for us is to understand that all of us, we do have a philosophy of life. It's part of our own natural way of experiencing reality. Okay? And it makes a big difference in our life, which is the way how we see reality. So from this perspective, what did Buddha do? Buddha was a person as us. So Buddha was not like someone sent from heaven or anyhow like already very special from the beginning. Sure, he had from lives and lives of practice, he had already a very strong predisposition for spiritual practice and so on. This is no doubt. He had many qualities. But he was a person, a human being. And the Buddha, for me, had a very special quality. This is a quality that most probably you will not see it written anywhere in any book, because it's my own personal way of seeing it, maybe a little bit different, which is one of the very special qualities of Buddha for me, was that he never ever, how would you say that in English? It's not the right word, it's not accepted, but, okay, let's say accepted, but it's not the best word. He never accepted that he must suffer. He always said, okay, there must be a way to overcome suffering. So his father saw that aspect. So he tried to avoid every suffering for him and to put him in the middle of all sorts of pleasures because he was very afraid that he would escape. So his father was like, putting him in a beautiful palaces, one for summer, one for winter, and then at the same time giving all sorts of pleasures of food. And when he got after a certain age, then he started giving him many women and all sorts of pleasures of the body. And then he found him a very nice wife to whom he fell in love, and he had a nice child, and he did everything that he could actually in order to make Buddha to feel comfortable and happy and have no suffering at all. It was done the best way that it was possible materially. But still, Buddha was looking at all of this and he said, okay, nice, but something missing. Not really enough. And this is an experience that I believe many, many people nowadays also have, no? How many people are there that materially have everything that they would actually need? And still they look to the situation, finally say, something missing. But normally what we do, we just continue in our own illusion, and then we go on, we move on. Buddha said, no, there must be a way out. There must be a way out of suffering. So he had 4 opportunities of getting out of the palace. And in these times he saw 4 situations which changed his life. Which are situations that we all see, but we don't know how, we do not reflect so much about them. We don't have the same perspective. Which are, one time he saw a sick person, another time he saw an old person, and another time he saw a dying person, and in the 4th time he saw one man which dedicated his life for the spiritual path, which gave up, let's say, mundane life, and then he dedicated life for the spiritual path. So when he came back to the palace after all of this, he was talking to his father, who was the king and had all the power and pleasures and everything. He was asking his father, look, are you going one day to die? His father said, yes. Will you ever get sick? Yes. Will you get old? Yes. So what's the point of all of this, trying to avoid suffering in all this way, if suffering anyhow will come? You are not overcoming suffering. You are just like putting some nice, beautiful brocade cloth around something that is actually dirty. No? You're not really cleaning it. You are not really taking out suffering throughoutly. So based on that, what happened was that he started to see that the monk was that one that really gave up the illusion. It's not that giving up pleasures. That's not the right word. What he was doing is that he gave up the illusion of finding happiness in the mundane life. And he went to dedicate his life to spiritual path. So he said, okay, that's the way, that's the best way, because the rest I already know and it's not really working, so let's go to look for something else. So he escaped from the palace, and he went out looking of all the different religious and spiritual traditions that were existing at his time there. And he was practicing them very strongly and deeply and in an excellent manner. For example, he did very long time of ascetic practices, like staying in the middle of fire and not eating and drinking and so many other things, following the process, the idea that we need to overcome, to control the body in order to control the mind. And then and the sufferings are coming from the pleasures of the body. So if we just give up the body and then we keep the mind purely, then it's possible we go out beyond suffering and entering into deep stages of meditation. And Buddha saw that he would enter into very, very deep stages of meditation. But even though that was not eliminating his suffering, he would go into very deep states of meditation. While he was in deep states of meditation, there would be no suffering at all. But at some point, he would need to get out of that state of meditation. Then what? He could stay in a state of meditation for maybe years, without eating, without drinking, just there meditating perfectly, nicely, happily. But then after that, what happened? He get out of the state of meditation, and once again, he would still need to become old and to die and all of this with suffering. So he said, no, there must be a way out. So finally, making a long story short, he said, okay, he found that there is the real solution was in the middle way. And very often in Buddhist teachings, we will find the middle way, which is not going to one extreme or to the other extreme, finding a way in between. And he thought, okay, we should not give up at the body. We should not look at happiness in the body, but we should not go against the body also. So he started nourishing his body, taking more care of the body also, and he went to meditate by himself in a forest called the Deer Park, near Varanasi. No, sorry, in Bodh Gaya. Not the Deer Park, he went to Bodh Gaya, which was a forest at the time also. So at the forest of Bodh Gaya, he sat under this ficus, really, which is like we call the Bodhi tree. And then he sat under the Bodhi tree to meditate, and he stayed around 6 years meditating there. Up to the moment where he found he was able to overcome all his inner conflicts. So he was able to overcome anger, jealousy, pride, miserliness, anger, hatred, selfishness, and finally, deeply, ignorance. So by that, at the same time, he developed his qualities, such as love and compassion and wisdom and generosity and stability and so on. So once Buddha reached this state, which we call enlightenment, the first words that Buddha said were, which is something like that. Profound and peaceful, free of elaboration, non-composed as clear light. Such a nectar I have found. To whoever I may explain it, will not be able to understand it. So I remain by myself in the forest meditating. which means that what Buddha experienced is something that is not conceptual, which there are no words that actually can describe it and can make a person to understand it right away and experience it. It's not a conceptual state. So Buddha stayed for 49 days meditating until a moment which he was requested by two gods, which were Brahma and Indra, to give teachings. These gods say, okay, they had clairvoyance, so they saw that Buddha reached such an incredible state, and they said, please, share this with the world. Don't keep it only for yourself. So he went to Varanasi, in the deer park, where he met his first 5 disciples, which were the 5 disciples when he was doing ascetic practice. And when they saw Buddha, they saw that Buddha had a different light. He was completely changed. And they said, oh, what did you do? What happened to you? Then Buddha starts sharing with him the Four Noble Truths, which we will see later. But at that time, what Buddha did is that he started sharing with others his own worldview, his own paradigm, his own way of seeing and experiencing reality, and how to develop such experience. So based on that, Buddhism is what? Is the path, is the process. By following the instructions that were given to Buddha, how to develop a different worldview, how to develop a different paradigm, how to develop a different way of experiencing reality. Why a different one? Because basically, deeply, what we all want, to be happy. What everybody wants. It doesn't matter who we are, what is our culture, what is our religion, our social status. It doesn't matter all of this, any aspect. What everybody wants is to be happy and not suffer. And we do everything we do thinking it is actually the best for our own happiness. So the point is that what can we do that really works? So Buddhism is a path. There are methods, because one important thing is that Buddha was not made of a different substance that we are. A human being, that is us. So we have the same potential as Buddha. So what Buddha is showing us is that, look, okay, I did this, it worked for me. Why don't you do the same? That's basically what it is. Okay? And one other thing which I forgot to say in English is that we all have our own view of reality. We all have our own philosophy of life. All of us, we believe in something and we have our own view. And our view is based on what people say to us, on what we learn. It's based on the experiences we have and our own logical process. But there is a great part of our own experience of reality which is based on assumptions. Even if we say, okay, I am not religious, I am totally skeptical, and I don't want to follow anything which is not scientific. Even if we take a person that is following purely scientific view, still is based on faith, on assumption. Now, what is an assumption? In Tibetan we say, that's the definition of an assumption, which means when we are sure about something, without having had a direct experience about it or a logical process of understanding it through our thought. And when we look, even though how many things we say, oh, that's scientifically proven, so we believe. Have we proven it ourselves? Have we understood it logically perfectly? No. Have we had a direct experience about it? When we see all the theories, for example, about the speed of light or whatever else, okay? Have we proven that ourselves? Do we have the perfect understanding about it? Most of the time, not. Do we have a direct experience about it? No. Do we believe in it? Yes. Why? Because it's scientifically proven, so we believe in it. Okay. So, how many things were scientifically proven, then later were proven that they were wrong? It's like, it is, what I want to say is that even I have deep respect for the whole scientific world, because it's really sincere research. But the point is that even if we have a very non-religious approach, we still have assumption. We still have our own way of seeing reality. Because the question here is, which is the best way of seeing reality? Which is the right way? Which is the wrong way? Which is the right paradigm to live in? I would say the right one is the one that makes us happy. That's it. That's the main point. That makes us happy and makes us to also live in a way of harmony with making others happy also around us. Okay? Well, so the main thing here is that Buddhism, for me, basically one of the most important aspects is Buddha Shakyamuni more than 2,500 years ago. Some people say 2,800 years ago. For me, it doesn't make any difference really. The point is that Buddha shared with us methods, clear ways how to change our paradigm. He is showing to us how he sees reality so that we can see it in the same way, and by that we can make our life better life. And we can help others also. So basically, in very few words. Okay? But now we'll go more into details. So, the first teachings that Buddha gave were the Four Noble Truths. And when we make an introduction to Buddhism, I think it's inevitable to talk about the Four Noble Truths because that's the fundamental aspect of Buddhism. One very, very beautiful aspect of Buddhist teachings for me is that the more I go along the path, the more I study, the more I learn, I meditate, I understand, and so on, the more clear and the more deep and beautiful the fundamental teachings become. It's very nice, after maybe 20 years or whatever time, we go back to the same fundamental aspects and we understand it in a different way. It's so nice. So it's not something like, okay, I have studied the Four Noble Truths, okay, that I already understood. That's the very beginning. Okay, let's move on. No, it's fundamental and it remains fundamental. And the more we move along the path, the more we see how important it is. And we see with different eyes. So there is one aspect of the Four Noble Truths which I understood a few years ago, very short time ago. And which changed completely my way of seeing the Four Noble Truths and gave me so much joy. So I would like to start from that aspect. But if there is something I like to do is trying to explain in a simple way something that took a long time for me to understand. Hoping it would not take the same time for others. No? So the Four Noble Truths, why are they called Four Noble Truths? There is the whole explanation, classically speaking, and so on. But what's the reason why it's called the Four Noble Truths? First of all, it's called truth, not in the sense that these are the truth and all the rest is false. That's not the point. It's not saying, okay, we Buddhists, we have the truth in our hands, and all the other religions are completely false. That's not the point. There are many things that are true. Okay? But this is four aspects which are fundamental to our lives, which there are four ways how they exist, how they are seen. So truth, in Tibetan Dempa, it means how it exists. Okay, it is in truth, it is like this. Okay, this is a bell, truly. Is the truth like saying, okay, how does it exist? It's not the truth in relation of, okay, what is the real truth and not truth, like in relation to having the real answer for everything in our own hand and all the rest being wrong. That's not the point. But it must be connected with the word noble. The word noble, it's coming that in Buddha's teachings, we divide sentient beings, us, into two categories, let's say. The infantile beings, like me, like most of us, and noble ones, Arya in sense. Okay? Which means an infantile being, an infantile person, is someone that has ignorance and selfishness, basically. Like, we are selfish. in front of a moment where we need to choose if something is good or bad, which is our reference? The I and the my, or the whole? The I and the my. So, in the moment that we need to make a choice, when we need to judge something, what is the reference that we have? The I and the mind, or the whole? The I and the mind. So we are selfish. Okay? So we are childish, infantile. Then, at the same time, we are ignorant. The more we go on, the more we understand better what we mean by being infantile. But which means infantile means suffer. How do I know if I am infantile or not? Do I suffer? Yes. Okay. So that's enough. Do I have insatisfaction and anxiety and so on? Yes. So what am I? Noble or infantile? Infant. Then, who are the nobles? Those that have overcome completely their own ignorance and selfishness. So the noble truth is how the noble, the wisdom beings, are seeing these four aspects. The Four Noble Truths, there are four, which means four fundamental aspects of our lives. There are four fundamental aspects that the infantile beings will see in one way and the noble beings will see in a different way. So which is the point of view, which is the reality, which is the truth according to the noble? That are the Four Noble Truths. Okay? But the point which took a long time for me to understand is that the Four Noble Truths is not something that it's only coming from outside that we need to apply in our life. Because for a long time I saw it. I did all my best to put it into practice. It gave great benefit for myself. It's incredible in many senses. It's opening our mind. But I was seeing it for a long time as something that, okay, this is Buddha's teachings I need to apply in my life. Like something coming from outside to me. Here is me, here is my life, there are the Four Noble Truths. And actually, what Buddha is doing by teaching the Four Noble Truths is not saying anything new in a way for us. It's talking about fundamental aspects that we already have. When we say four, it means four aspects which are fundamental to us that we already have. But instead of seeing it in one way, we need to see it in a different way. So we could say we have the Four Noble Truths and we have also the Four Infantile Truths. So today I would like to have a different approach than the common one, which is to start explaining the Four Infantile Truths, which we don't need much explanation because we know them so well. But the point is that once we understand the four, let's say, childish, infantile truth, we see it, then it's much more easy for us to understand that the Four Noble Truths are not something separated from us, are talking about fundamental aspects of our life. Okay? It's very important because all the aspects of Buddha's teaching is talking about a reality that we have. It's not something that is coming from outside. In the sense like, even all the aspects of Buddha are aspects that we have developed in a different way, developed in a maximum potential. So it's talking about us. When Buddha talk about it, when Buddha is talking about the Four Noble Truths, it's talking about each and every one of us because it's talking about four fundamental aspects of our existence. Okay? So we have a different approach today. We will go first to the infantile truths, if we can call it like that. And then we go after to the noble truths. Okay? First of all, what we need to do is to understand, to see these four aspects of life which are fundamental. Okay, so before going to the actual noble truths, to the actual way how a noble wisdom being will see these four aspects, let's see which are the four fundamental aspects and how do we see them normally. Okay. So the four fundamental aspects are quite simple, which are: what is suffering? Which are the causes of suffering? What is happiness? And how to be happy. Very simple. What is suffering? Which are the causes of suffering? What is happiness? How to be happy. Okay?
So basically, these are the 4 fundamental aspects that we have in our life. If we look well, almost the whole of our life we can, condense it, we can put it together into these 4 aspects. So first of all, how do we see suffering? Normally, we would say that there is the suffering of body and the suffering of mind. Okay? So there is the suffering of body, which is basically hunger, thirst, cold, heat, and pain. That's basically is the suffering of body. Okay? So we have all sorts of pains. We have when we are hungry or when we are feeling too cold and so on. So this is the suffering of body. We don't need to go into details about it. We know it quite well. Okay? Suffering of body. Suffering of mind, we have sadness, anxiety, fear, and so on. And we could put suffering into these 2 categories. But Buddha also explained some other categories that we all experience already and we all recognize normally, which is quite nice to look from that perspective. There is the suffering of body, which we have just seen. Then Buddha also talked about the suffering of the social suffering, the material suffering, and the mental suffering. 4 types of suffering. So we have physical suffering, social suffering, material suffering, and mental suffering. Physical suffering, as we saw, is the suffering of the body, basically. Then we have the social suffering. Social suffering is the suffering which comes from the conflict generated by society, by relating with each other. How many people we need to get social suffering? 2. How many people we need to have conflict? 1. Okay. So what happened is that you have 2 people with conflict put together, you have another conflict, no? Why we have conflict between 2 people? Because each one is in conflict with himself, basically. Okay. But what happened is that if we look, even if we talk to psychologists, I've talked to many of them, and more than 90% of the problems that people bring to a psychologist is relationship. With the father, with the mother, with the friend, with the uncle, with the husband, with the wife, and so on. Okay? So, it's one of the main points that if we look from all the suffering that we have, it's how to relate to people and conflict, and how come this person is like this, how come that person is like that, and because he said this he was not supposed to say, he did this he was not supposed to do, and so on. Okay? So we have our social suffering, and then which comes from a personal level up to a social level. So we can see we have conflict clashes between parts of society and so on. Then we have the material suffering. The material suffering is not only when we are poor and we don't have enough materially. Material suffering, like 3 types of suffering related to money. It's the suffering to accumulate, the suffering to maintain, and the suffering to make it grow. Once I get 100, can it remain 100? Once I get 100, can it become 90? No. Cannot go down what I have. And then actually I need to make more. So there is always the suffering of generating money, keeping it, and making it grow. Okay? And it's never enough. So, even this, I just remember someone that I know, that's now in Brazil we have economical crisis. And there is this person who has a lot of money, no problem at all, really, but he's so much suffering because he's worried he's going to lose his money with the crisis. So you can see this is a sort of material suffering. It's related to the material aspect. So, how do I keep it? Maybe I lose it. How do I do with it? And then there is all the part of work related to it and everything that is related to generating, maintaining, and growing material things. Okay, so this is basically the suffering of material things. And it's also the suffering like once we have something, we need to take care of it, no? So you have a house, you need to clean the house, you need to take care of the house, you have something, you need to do everything. So there's a whole suffering related to the material things that we have also. And then there is the suffering related to the mind, which is the mental defilement, which normally we don't see so much. But let's call it mental suffering. So we have sadness and anxiety and fears and so on and so on. So we see suffering, okay? Second truth, which are the causes of suffering? Do we see something as the cause of our suffering? Are we ready to blame anyone for our own suffering? Can we point a finger to something and someone? All the time. We're always blaming someone or something for our own suffering. Sure, it's not our fault. I don't want to suffer. So why should it be my fault? Sometimes yes, but most of the time no. So what happened? I am suffering. Why? Because this situation is like this, because that situation is like that, because this person did this, that person did that, because this is not in the way how it should be, that is not in the way how it should have been done, and he this and that, and so and so and so and so on. Okay? So normally we blame everything around us as the causes of our own suffering. Then, third truth. Happiness. What is happiness? What is the goal? What is the objective I have in my life? Where do I want to reach? What do I want? And if we look, we do have a goal. We do have a way how we believe that we can be happy, you know? And this is some sort like, you know, I think a nice image of it is like the American dream when we have, okay, what do I need to be happy? Beautiful house with a nice garden, a beautiful dog, nice couple with beautiful children, nice and stable job, a nice car, whatever, okay? There is the image that we can imagine. That comes to my mind, okay, oh, that life would be nice. But it's a little bit of Walt Disney also, no? And they lived happily forever and ever. So, like, we have this many ideas of happiness that were given to us in our education, in the culture where we live, even through publicity, like so many things that we need to buy in order to be happy, no? So it's constantly giving us this idea of happiness being something which, once the world around me will be perfect, once I will have everything in the way I want, once everything will be perfectly nice, I will be finally happy. Okay? And we do believe in it. Okay? And one thing that is quite funny somehow, it's not the right word, it's not funny, but it's strange, is how we are capable of experiencing things and that not seeing that things don't work and still following it. We are very stubborn somehow. So I was remembering one time, a few years ago, I went to school in Milan to talk to the children about Buddhism. I was invited to talk in a school about Buddhism, so I got to the school. It was called, I think, Maria Pizzigoni, the name of the school, a very nice public school in Milan. And when I reached the school, there were like 200 kids from 5 to 7 years old. And I said, okay, what do I do now? I said, how long I had? They said, okay, I have like an hour and a half. I said, okay, let's talk about Buddhism, 4 Noble Truths, but let's put it in a simple and easy approach. So I was like playing a little bit with the kids, talking nicely. I made some friendship with them, like talking, okay? And then at one point I was explaining the causes of suffering, desire. So I asked the kids, is there a toy that you would like to have? And all the kids said, yes. Did it ever happen during your birthday time or maybe at Christmas or something like that, that you got the toy that you wanted? They all said, yes. Were you happy? Yes. How long did your happiness last? Long or short? They looked at me a little bit sad and they said, short. Do you still have the toy? Yes, we do. Does it still make you happy as before? No. Do you want another toy? Yes. How long is the next toy going to make you happy? Long or short? A little bit sad. they told me, sure. The point is that we're not special kids, okay? We all know since we are small that happiness through material development, truly it's an illusion. We're just changing toys all the time since we are kids and after when we become adults. It remembers me a friend when we were going to a town in a place in Brazil, and he was in front of his private jet. And then he looked to me and he said, the only difference between big and small boys is the size of their toys. Which, it's basically the truth. Like we're changing toys as we go on, and then we have pleasures, and then we have money, and then we have power, and so many other things, but we are changing toys somehow. But deeply, we know that it's not going to work. We know that sooner or later something is going to go wrong, and then we will have problems again. Deeply inside, we know that this is simply not enough to make us happy. But we still believe in it. Okay? So, what is happiness for us? Not conceptually. That's an important point. When we talk about the four infantile truths, it's not like saying, okay, conceptually what is happiness? Oh, conceptually for me, I must reach enlightenment. And we have very beautiful ideas. Not conceptually, in our daily practice, in every action that we do. When we wake up in the morning, what's the first thought that comes to our mind? I want to reach enlightenment? Or, oh, my job, oh, I need to look beautiful today because I need to see that person and I must attract his or her attention so that I won't get his or her desire, because when someone desires me, I feel that I am loved and like to feel loved. Or we have the idea that we need to look beautiful, we need to be attractive, or we have the idea that we need to get more money and we need to get power and influence or whatever. Okay? Where do we put our energy really daily in our life? What are truly our own priorities? That's how we know where we project our happiness. So this is the third truth. Okay? The fourth truth is, what do we do in order to be happy? Which is like, in which direction are we taking our life? Because the life is made of days, which are made of minutes and hours and minutes and so on. So in every action I do, in every choice I make, which is the direction I am actually giving to my life, which is directly connected to what I believe is happiness. And what am I doing truly to get there? Okay? It's not so easy to find the answer. Because I don't know how often we have actually reflected upon it. How often we have made a question to ourselves, what is happiness truly? How do I see it? Not what is happiness conceptually. In my own daily experience, how do I see happiness? Where I am, where am I? If we do not do this, there is a danger of us studying the Four Noble Truths, beautiful, wonderful, and not giving up the four infantile truths. So truly we live in the infantile truths. Conceptually we have the Four Noble Truths. So what we need to do is we need to see the reality, how we experience it, in order to apply that in our life. Okay? So it's not something that we will do from one day to the other. It's a gradual process. Also to see our own reality. How do I see suffering? How do I see the causes of suffering? Where do I project it? How do I see what is happiness for me? What is the cessation of suffering for me? How do I imagine it? How do I picture it? And what am I doing in order to be happy? Okay. So with this we have what we can call the four infantile, which are very important. Because once we have it clear, it's like looking at ourselves in the mirror and understanding, seeing ourselves more clearly. You know? Otherwise, if we do not see where we are, it becomes very dangerous that we go and we study all the Buddhist teachings and it just remain a conceptual thing. And that's not the point. Okay? So, as I go now to Italian, you have some time to reflect upon which is the four infantile truths for each one of us. Where do we really project ourselves? Okay. Now, let's see, when we talk about the Four Noble Truths, once we have seen the infantile truths, how we infantile beings see reality, how actually is the way of a noble person, of someone with wisdom. So we start with the first one. We will see them with no hurry, slowly, we have time. So the first one is the suffering, the truth of suffering. So suffering does exist. When we look at that, Buddha explained there are three types of sufferings, which are called, in Tibetan we say, Dungal Gidungal, Gurwe Dungal, Kyabaduche Gidungal, which are, I'm never really very happy with translations, but anyhow, we have the suffering of suffering, the suffering of change, or the changing suffering, and the suffering of change, and the all-pervasive suffering. Okay? So suffering of change, all-pervasive suffering. It's three types of suffering. So let's start with the first. The suffering of suffering is everything that we normally call suffering. So basically, we have already seen it before. We have the suffering of body and we have the suffering of mind. Suffering of body, we have all the sorts of sicknesses and pain. Basically, it's like pain and hunger and thirst and heat and cold and so on. Okay? Actually, what is the definition of suffering? Suffering as a sensation. The definition of suffering is that all sensations that we have, that we want it to end as soon as possible and not to come back again. That is suffering. And the sensations of well-being, of happiness, of joy, pleasure, are all the sensations that we have, that we want them to continue and to come back again as soon as possible. That's the sensation of pleasure. And then we have the neutral sensations, which are all the sensations we have, and it doesn't make difference if it continues or not. Okay? So, suffering is as a sensation. We have the suffering which manifests through the body and the suffering that manifests through the mind, which we call physical suffering and mental suffering. So, physical suffering is quite clear. And then we have mental suffering, which is like anxiety, sadness, fear, and so on. If we look to ourselves in our society, what do we have more? Physical suffering or mental suffering? Mental suffering. One of the teachers of Lama Ganchen, captured Son Rinpoche, his name. One of his teachings, I listened to the recording, he said, the suffering of suffering is of two types. The suffering of body and the suffering of mind. The rich suffer, the poor suffer mostly of physical suffering. The rich suffer mostly of mental suffering. But finally, both suffer the same way. So, which is mental suffering? We have fear, anxiety, sadness, depression. Then we have another aspect which is also like what is coming from conflicts, like from jealousy and envy and anger and hatred, all of these things. There is another type of mental suffering also, which is this infinite inner dialogue, which is coming, I believe, from a conflict between the understanding and the feeling. Because our own understanding, our thoughts, are the results of all the informations we have received up to now. So what we studied, what people taught us, what we saw, what we thought, our reflections, and so on. While our feelings are the results of our experiences. Okay? So, when our thoughts and our feelings are not exactly in the same balance, when there is incoherence between the two, we may get into conflict. And then we start this inner dialogue. Why like this or like that, and so and so. And we can pass hours and days with it. We can in so many things, and we make so many problems. So our mental suffering is also made of this, all these problems that we make within ourselves, which in Tibetan is said, it's like making a big shadow of something that doesn't have a form. Okay? So it's like so much fear and problems and suffering, and it's all, we're just making it up. Okay? So we have a lot of suffering which is created through our mind. Okay? But then if we look through our lives, which suffering we are trying to avoid mostly? Physical suffering. Nowadays in our society, to have physical suffering is something so absurd, like you cannot have any physical suffering, so you cannot feel hunger, you cannot feel pain, you cannot have, if you have any pain right away, you have a painkiller. If you feel too hot, you have an air condition, or if it's cold, you have heating or whatever, It's always, we do everything to avoid every type of physical suffering. But if we really look, where do we suffer more? From the actual suffering of a sickness, from the pain itself, or from the fear of the sickness and the fear of the suffering itself? Normally, we suffer more from the fear of suffering than the actual suffering. So we have more mental suffering than physical suffering, even when related to a sickness. Okay? So, and when we have a strong physical suffering, mental suffering, gone up to a certain level. Because it's like when we have a big problem, do we think about small problems? And when we have no real problems, what happens? We make small problems become big problems. Okay? This remembers me of the story, a Jewish story of the rabbi and the goat, which is a story in which the husband comes to the rabbi and starts complaining about the wife and his job and this and that and now all the story we know. Then comes the wife to the rabbi and goes and say, oh, because my husband and because this and because that and the rabbi was just listening. Then comes the son, oh, because my father and my mother and this and that, complaining about many things. And then the rabbi said, okay, wait, I will give you a solution. Then one day the rabbi calls the family and says, okay, I have a solution for you. Take the goat, put it in the middle of the living room, free. But cannot go outside, needs to stay inside the living room for 10 days. And after you come back. So they go there, they take the goat, they put the goat inside the living room. And then after 10 days, they come back. And then the rabbi asked, oh, how are you? They said, oh, this goat, how terrible is the goat? He's eating the sofa and eating everything around. And he's making so much dirt and his smell, and we are not able anymore to be together in the time of dinner. He's coming to the table. It's something so terrible. We cannot live like this. Oh, this goat. He said, and how is their husband? Oh, they are okay, no problem. It's the goat the problem, Oh, and the job is fine. Just take out the goat. Everything will be perfect. So finally the rabbi said, okay, wait 1 minute, a few days more. How is life? Oh, this goat, terrible. Then he finally says, okay, take out the goat. And then come back after 10 days. Then they come back after 10 days. And how is life? Everything's so wonderful, so good without the goat. Everything is so good and so on. And how is the husband and wife? Oh, everything is good, fine, no problem, Sure, maybe if you could call them 10 days after again, they will have another problem to complain again. But the main point of the story is when we have a bigger problem, we don't make small things a problem. When we have no real problems, small problems become big problems. The color of my hair or whatever else. We make problems with so many little stupid things. This person said this, that person thought that, this and here and there. So all of this is actually basically suffering which is coming from our mind. But when we have a strong physical suffering, this is not present. That's why we say poor people are those that don't have enough food and so on, so they have more physical suffering. And once you have enough materially, you start making so many mental problems so that you have more mental suffering. Okay? So basically, this is the suffering of suffering. Okay, we know it very well. We don't need to go into many details about it. Now, let's go to the second one, which is very important. Because the first one, which is the suffering of suffering, it's already what commonly all of us see as suffering. The second and the third are two things that are of the nature of suffering, even though they are not actual suffering. Okay? Are things that sooner or later will manifest as a sensation of suffering, but by itself are not actual suffering. So, we have the suffering of change and the all-pervasive suffering. So now we will see the suffering of change. The suffering of change, basically, are all the things that we see as pleasure, but actually are not able to sustain pleasure. For example, if I am very thirsty and I drink water, what's the sensation? Pleasure. It's good. It's wonderful. Nothing wrong. Very nice. So physical pleasures, do they bring us pleasure, sensation of joy? Yes. But if I continue to drink the water, 1 glass, 2 glasses, 3 glasses, 1 liter, 2 liters, and I go on. As I continue to drink the water, the more water I drink, is it going to sustain the sensation of pleasure and satisfaction? No. What happens after some time? Drinking the same water that was bringing me joy, it becomes suffering. Okay? If someone comes and touches us touches us in a way that we like, okay? Very nice, very soft, very gentle, we like that person, so nice, and the person is touching us, oh how, and the person continues touching us, and goes on, and goes on, goes on, 1 hour, 2 hours. Okay? At a certain point we say, excuse me, I need to go somewhere else. What happened? Something that before was bringing us pleasure and happiness becomes cause of suffering. But like this is for all pleasures, physical pleasure. Nothing wrong with the pleasure itself, simply it cannot sustain happiness. Okay? So it's not that the pleasure is wrong, but its own nature cannot sustain the sensation of pleasure. It's an illusion of happiness. Momentarily, yes, but cannot sustain satisfaction and happiness. Material things. Are we happy when we receive a nice present? Yes. I'm sure, if I come here and I give a very beautiful present for everyone, if I give money, we go here and we give 10,000 euros for each one. Even less. Everybody would be happy, no? Oh, maybe not. Some people happy, but why is he giving me this money? Some guilt there. Okay, some people, we're able to make problems everywhere. But let's say everything is fine, no guilt, no nothing, no fear. Just receive, okay, I'm happy. But does that mean the more money I receive, the more happy I am? Actually not. What happened is actually the other way around. The more money I have, the more material things I have, the more I need to reach the same level of satisfaction and joy. Because finally, really, if we observe, what are we actually looking for? I want the water, or I want the sensation of satisfaction and joy? I want the sensation. So, that's why sometimes, I was thinking, when we see, for example, people that develop very well, all of us, like developing our senses. It's actually, I don't know how to say this in English. In Italian we say fregatura. It would be something that looks good, but actually it's not. Like an illusion, let's say. Because to develop our senses, for example, people that have very good ability of tasting wine. Okay? So I've seen this many times. oh, this wine have this type of wood and that type of wood and this like that and this type of grape and so nice and very wonderful. It's okay. But the point is that if you take this person and then he's drinking wine, the more our senses are developed, the more we need something of a certain type in order to feel satisfaction. Then you take the guy that has no real much idea about wine, he just likes wine. He drinks any wine and he's happy with it. Finally, who's having more pleasure? Okay? The point is like, it's understanding that what we are really looking for is the sensation of pleasure. Okay? But all the things that we have normally, they cannot sustain that sensation. That's why we always need to look for something new. Because momentarily, yes, but they're not able to sustain. That's why it's called the suffering of change. It's something that sooner or later will change into suffering. Material things, pleasures of the senses, recognition of our image. That's the third illusion. Are we happy when we receive a compliment? Yes, no? A classical example is when someone comes to us and say, oh, you know, that person said something about you, someone that we really like. Okay, you know, Rinpoche said this about you, something nice. And then what's the answer that we receive very often? Oh, sorry, I didn't listen well. Can you repeat it? Sure, we listen well. But it's a massage to the ego, no? We really like so much when someone comes and makes a compliment to us. But what happens when we start receiving a lot of compliments all the time? The effect gets less and less. And the problem is that the more recognition I receive, the more recognition I need in order to reach that same level of satisfaction. And when I don't have that recognition, then I suffer. Like, not all, but many people which, like artists and people living in the world of television and so on, and that they have very lot of recognition, one of the great suffering for them is to go somewhere and people not recognizing who they are. There's a lot of suffering for many people. So, our image, you know, it's also another illusion. So basically, pleasures, material things, and our own reputation and image. There's nothing wrong about all of this, but they are of the nature of suffering. That's why they're called the suffering of change. None of these are able actually to sustain our happiness for a middle or long. Just for the first instant, wow. Then right away, what happened? So, this is something that it is quite clear. Someone may say to me, oh, but you know what, like, how this Buddhism thing, you know, before was as if it would not be enough to have the suffering of suffering. Now I even have what I thought was happiness. That's also suffering. So what I do now? One important point here is that it should not be suffering. We should not suffer by seeing suffering, by recognizing our own suffering. It's like the same process, for example, of a sickness. Personally, the way how I think is that when there is a sickness and we know that we are sick, we receive the right diagnosis, it should be a way of relief. In the sense, oh, how lucky I am that I know what I have so I can do something about it. Because if I have a suffering, a sickness, and I don't know that I am sick, and I'm not doing anything to take care of that sickness, the sickness is just going to get worse and worse and worse. In the moment that I know that I am sick and I can do something about it, oh, I'm lucky, that's good. The problem is that normally we get a lot of fear. In the moment that I get sick, I get fear because I have fear of suffering, and normally we suffer more from the fear of suffering than the actual suffering. Lama once told to one person I was translating, he said to this person, the sickness is like a balloon, but without air. The fear of sickness is the air we put inside the balloon and we make it big. So, but it is still better to have some fear and to be able to do something about the sickness than not doing anything. It is a way of attitude. So when we know there is something wrong, we can actually do something about it. This is very important. Okay? So when we look at the suffering of change, all pervasive suffering, it is like looking to our own reality with clarity and saying, okay, here I am living in an illusion. Better to do something about it. And this we will go to the next Noble Truths, which is showing us the path. But it's having clarity about reality. And this is something which is very important. Okay. So it's not something that we should suffer because we see suffering. It's the other way around. We should feel somehow relieved. Oh, finally I see that clear. I have been hitting my head, hitting my nose for a whole life, thinking that I would be happy with these types of pleasures, and here I am, now finally understood that it would not make me happy. Does this mean that we need to avoid all types of pleasures and all types of material things and repetition? No. But we should not apply to it a value that it cannot sustain. The solution is not avoiding pleasure. If we go to see what's the path that Buddha shows us, which we will see later, it's not avoiding pleasures. It's developing our qualities. It's understanding that we cannot project our happiness on this. It's part of life, here we are. Like, okay, I'm drinking the water, I enjoy it. No water, it's fine. But it's just important to make this point clear. The problem is not the pleasures, it's not the material things, it's not the reputation, it's how we relate to this. That's the actual problem. Okay? So because we relate to these things as true happiness, when actually they are of the nature of suffering. Okay? Clear? So we stop now for lunch, and then after we come back to continue with the other Four Noble Truths. Okay?
Chetson lame kutse rapten chi namkar tinle chochur gepa dang losan tempe dreme sasumgi drowe musel tatu ne gyurchi Nimo dele tsendele nime kuyan delekshin Ninsen taktu delekpe Poncho sumge jinge lo Poncho sumge ngodrup sol Poncho sumge trashish
At dawn or dusk, at night or midday, may the three jewels grant us their blessings. May they help us to achieve all realizations and sprinkle the path of our lives with various signs of auspicion.